Morning guys, Real 111T here. This is gonna kind of be a continuation of the last video about expedition stoves. This is a video about more heavy-duty, traditional type expedition stoves. In a lot of ways, some of these designs are progenitors of the ones that we saw in that video. They have similar performance. Some of them are multi-fuel. The difference here is the ones traditionally that are single fuel can be either kerosene or Coleman fuel, okay? And this is for a slightly different situation. In general, these stoves are all designed to be transported, and they are designed to break down and basically fit into a pack. They are quite a bit heavier than, the Nova or the Omni Fuel or the multi-fuel or other, modular stoves like that. These are kind of the progenitors of those designs, and these are the ones that basically the MSR people were looking at and saying, well, that's all well and good, but let's have that same performance, but the weighs a lot less. Now, as we also said in that video, some of those design decisions were detrimental, and there is a happy medium, I think, that the Swedish companies found. Most of these are Swedish, with a couple exceptions. Basically, what we've got here is, let's go with this one first, because this is the most traditional design. When I said that the pressure stoves evolved to be a household stove, it was something like this. This is an Optimus 45. And this stove was available with either the silent or the roaring burner. But this burner right here is the probably most basic kind of burner. Let me pull this flame spreader off here. Okay. Yeah. It's a little bit hard to see, but the way this burner works is the fuel goes up the outer tubes into the top. And then you see there's that cross pattern up there where it can mix and then go down this middle tube, and then the jet is down here pointed up at this. Okay, and that was the innovation. That sort of a burner would allow you to have a sustaining kerosene burning kind of situation where the actual flame is not only heating the cooking vessel, but it is heating the fuel that's still waiting, and it's cooling the whole burner. It's interesting, because the unburnt fuel is actually cooling the burner. When this burns, this outer ring glows red, but this does not, because this doesn't get that hot, because it's fuel cooled. All right, and it's like I said, there's a pump here, and that's how you pressurize it. When it's up and running, this is sort of an integral design. Everything is self-contained. You don't, if you want to refuel it in the field, you have to carry a separate bottle. But this stores quite a bit. Okay, and this is a very similar design, just with a silent burner on it. Okay, this is one of the non-Swedish ones. This is what's known as a bat stove. It's East German, and I purchased it new. Okay, these are very hard to find in a new state. These ones here, every now and again, they pop up. I think I got this one from Swisslink some years ago, and I wish I bought a few more. I think they were about $40. And when you see these, they've got these pot rings on here. Sometimes you don't need to have this on here to operate it. You need to have the legs that are holding it up, but typically a pot will sit right on the legs. But yeah, these are kerosene-only models. If you pick something up like this, St. Paul Mercantile was selling something similar made by Butterfly. I don't know what the quality of that was, and now that they're out, I don't know where to even acquire them. Okay, but the way this works, and you can find how-to videos on any of these, anything that looks like this, you can watch a how-to video and it'll work. You've typically got a pressure release valve somewhere. In the fuel filler here, there's this little part here. When you twist it down, it makes a seal, and when you release it, the air seal is broken. Okay, you have to prime it, just like we didn't see that with the other stoves, but basically with the it would work exactly the same way as with an OmniFuel or a Whisper Light or whatever. You have to, but with this you have to put alcohol in this cup down here. Okay, you light the alcohol and let it burn, and you really probably want to fill this almost close to the top, because these burners on all of these stoves are more massive. Okay, and it takes more heat to get them up to where they'll vaporize kerosene. And you have to use kerosene in them. That's the next thing I was getting to. For the ones that are designed for kerosene only, which is these three, do not ever think that you can just get by with Coleman fuel or gasoline. There are some design features of these, especially that fuel cap I showed you, that make it very hazardous. And one of the biggest dangers in the developing world where these are used as household stoves is when people get their kerosene cut with other petroleum products, because for the people who are selling the fuel do that because they happen to have maybe some gasoline, maybe they don't have quite the kerosene to fill the tanker truck up, so they top it off with some gasoline, which separates, and then somebody gets mostly gasoline. So that's very hazardous, because the way you shut this off is you bleed the pressure out of it. And you'll notice that's not what you do with like a Whisper Light or something like that. That's not the procedure. You shut the valve off. These two at least don't have valves at all. Okay, this one does, the original 111 hiker model, but these don't. So the only way to shut them off is to bleed the pressure. And if there was a gasoline type fuel or Coleman fuel in there, vapors would come out. Even if this went right out, it would still be hot enough that it could flash, and then you could have a fire, basically. So in kerosene only models, kerosene only. Okay. Now we move on over here, and this is, as I said, an original Optimus 111. This is actually, of these three kind of hiker stoves, this is the oldest one. It's also the nicest looking one. I use this on occasion. It's a real high output stove. It's a real nice stove. You'll notice, one difference between this and these here is that this has a similar bleeder valve. Sometimes these come with this, and sometimes, since it's regulated, sometimes it'll come with your more traditional type of safety release valve cap, and they're cross compatible. Okay, this is an innovation that was made to fit onto these stoves here. Why would you consider something like this over those more compact ones? In the other video, you remember, maybe I was talking about some of the weak points of those designs, and that one of the big ones was the fuel hose. Okay, and none of these stoves have that susceptibility. Do they have a fuel hose? Okay, that can kink or break or melt. Okay, these stoves, if you have a fire with these stoves, odds are you can basically salvage it. All right. In most situations, I would recommend you being outdoors. The kerosene stoves are actually designed as household stoves, and they can be used indoors safely. Once again, though, it's a petroleum fuel. If you have a problem, if you have kind of a runaway or something like that, with these ones, the first thing to do is, if you can get to this cap here, release the pressure, and usually that'll shut it off. Okay. If not, have a fire extinguisher handy for sure. And I do. Now moving on from this one, an evolution in design. One of my favorites, and this is my original camp stove, the first camp stove I ever got. This is, if you see my avatar, this is the actual one right here. That's in my avatar. This is a 111 triple fuel. There was a Coleman fuel only version in between. This is the 111. Then there's a 111B, which is the Coleman fuel only, gasoline only model. It's similar to just a giant 8R Hunter. And then this is the triple fuel, and this supposedly will burn kerosene, gasoline type fuels, which includes Coleman fuel, and alcohol. Now, alcohol requires a special jet, and it requires a air restrictor to control the fuel air mixture. I've never really gotten it to work really well, but typically I'll run either kerosene or Coleman fuel in this. Okay, and it's a great performer. It's fairly heavy. Okay, so you don't really want to pack it. There was a time when I did pack this around. Okay. These pop up on eBay all the time. I think this one here I got at Sportsman's Guide a couple years ago. You know, they're all fairly pricey. So, you know, there's that to consider. There is a new version of this on the market right now. The Hiker Plus, it's called. These ones are all known as the Hiker series, and this was a sort of a bomb-proof series that was really, you know, bought up by a lot of expeditions and outfitters, you know. And while I say these are heavy to carry, you know, if you're not carrying them, they're compact and they're reliable. Okay, so if you were running, like, say, a canoe touring service, or if you're outfitting canoeists, you don't necessarily need it to be super lightweight. But, you know, people are going to abuse the gear. You want it to be as reliable as possible. So this was a favorite, and they've had one on the line, you know, as this model has evolved, you know, with each innovation, they kind of made a new model of this. After the triple fuel model, they started using one burner for their backpack stoves and for the hiker model. They were just putting it in the box. And the one that came after this, the 111C, was using the same burner as the Optimus 11 Explorer, which was kind of an 80s model stove. They're very difficult to find because not many of them were made. Okay, and what it is, it's essentially a burner like this with tripod legs. That, you know, they were basically copying the MSR design. That was Optimus's first kind of foray into the modular kind of a stove market. The trouble was they made the burner smaller for the backpacking model, and they made it too small, really. They kept the case exactly the same size, and the burner was a little bit lower, and the stove was notoriously inefficient. Okay? So, you know, but that's a situation where design decisions being made for ease of manufacturing, and, you know, I really don't care for that. I really care about end user performance over everything else. So, but the current model, the Hiker Plus, you know, they kind of took that into account. And basically that uses the same burner, or a very similar burner, to the Nova. The service kit is basically the same for the Nova and the Hiker. But why would you want to carry one of these in a big steel box as opposed to an Optimus Nova? You know, that's definitely a point that's up for debate. The Nova tends to be a fairly reliable stove, but the difference, as I said, is you eliminate any issues with that fuel tube. Okay, that fuel tube doesn't exist. There's a brass tube, just like on these ones, that doesn't bend. The whole unit folds right up, and you're basically good to go. If you're not backpacking it, if it's going to be at your bug out location, or if it is going to be for bug in, you know, weight isn't so much of an issue. And this stows really nicely underneath the counter, and then if you have to use it, it's fairly reliable. You know, if you look in the U.S. Antarctic Program training manual, you can find it online. If you Google U.S. Antarctic Training Manual, you'll find it. It's a PDF, and I think it's chapter 14, if I'm not mistaken, on stoves. They don't have these listed, but they have the 111 models listed as primary stoves, and they have the Coleman model. Now let me talk about the Coleman model stoves for a moment here. Okay, of all of these, this is probably one you've seen. If you've been to Walmart lately, they probably have something similar to this sitting in their sporting goods department. Okay, probably a newer version of this. Sorry for how rough this one looks, guys. This one gets used on a fairly regular basis. This is a 413G, okay, which is the equivalent of the Powerhouse dual fuel that you see now. So it's the mid-size one. It's fairly decent size. Very practical cooking size. harder to pack, obviously. There's a smaller model, some version of 425 or 426 is a smaller, much smaller. I mean, the case on it is about this big, and it's not as deep. These are Coleman fuel only stoves. I've heard some people burn kerosene in them. It's really designed as a Coleman fuel only stove. The newer ones are listed as dual fuel, which Coleman's idea of dual fuel is it'll burn gasoline or our fuel. Okay. The idea of triple fuel on here is they count Coleman fuel and gasoline as one fuel. Okay, it has similar characteristics. Okay, kerosene is another fuel and alcohol is another fuel. So that's their triple fuel. It'd be a quad fuel if you count what Coleman thinks that gasoline and Coleman fuel are different fuels. Okay. Also in Europe, one thing to keep in mind is Coleman fuel is a lot harder to come by in the UK and Europe. Okay, it's hazardous to transport, and it commands a premium price. I think somewhere in the range, last I checked with some of my friends across the pond, you buy it in small containers, okay, and it's priced the way, say, Zippo fluid is priced in the United States. So you're running into a situation where it's very expensive per gallon once they add all their taxes and stuff onto it. It's prohibitively expensive. So what you see over there is they lean towards either alcohol stoves or kerosene stoves because they can get kerosene. Anywhere where planes go, there's going to be a kerosene market, okay, because it's useful stuff to have around. And anywhere a jet lands, there has to be a kerosene fuel supply. So, someone will figure out to start selling it to the locals as well, because it's more, they can get a higher price for that. But still, it's fairly reasonable, okay. Yeah, back to the Coleman models. These are, as long as the fuel's available, are a great option to have. I typically don't like using these indoors. I have used it indoors. I'm not going to be a hypocrite and tell you, oh, absolutely not. Make sure your stove is in good working order. If Coleman fuel gets out of hand, it can get out of hand a lot faster, basically. And the other thing about these is they're really designed to be outdoors. They're really high output. And if you have one that's adjusted a little bit wrong and you start kicking out a lot of carbon monoxide, I mean, they'll all probably produce carbon monoxide, guys. But one of these, if it's a little bit out of adjustment, it'll kick out a lot of it fast. And so once again, have a battery-powered carbon monoxide detector if you're in a situation where you feel you have to do that. And do it at your own risk, too. Don't think if you burn your house down with one of these, then you're going to come to me and say, well, 111T told me that I could use it indoors. I'm familiar with all these. I know how they all work and how they act when they're working properly. Now, I did hear a report of someone, this generator tube, was using one outdoors, and basically he had a failure of the generator tube. They age, they're a replaceable item, but it cracked wide open on him. So it just started spraying Coleman fuel out. He was outdoors, but there was a 10-foot fireball above the thing. So keep that in mind. Maybe you want a little bit bigger fire extinguisher. In an emergency situation is not necessarily where you want to be dealing with that. However, if the weather's not bad, and especially if it's in summertime, you could always use it outdoors the way it's designed to be used, fairly safely, out on the porch, something like that. Fire extinguisher is still a good thing to have around. I guarantee you, this is in the Antarctic manual as well, as a primary stove. I guarantee you they're not going outside to use it. Let me put it that way. Okay? And a liquid fuel stove will work in a lot of different conditions. Now, the big advantage of these for people in the United States is they're available. Coleman's been kicking these things out for decades upon decades. And people typically buy them, use them a couple times, put them in the garage, and that's it. Okay? Go on eBay and look for these. Okay? If you have someone who lists one as being functional, it might not be the prettiest thing in the world. It doesn't have to be new in box, brand new, okay? But if they're listing it as being functional and not like for parts, and you don't see huge rust on it, that looks like it's ruinous, okay? You can probably get a good deal. You could probably get one of these for $40 or less, okay? If you look, you do a little looking, and you look at the right time, okay? Because these are always coming up, and they don't really command a huge amount of money unless it's a collectible model. Okay, and Now the thing to keep in mind though is if you're going to try and put fuel by for this, the fuel is a lot more hazardous to put by and more expensive. You know, like I said, this at Walmart's gone up to like $12 a gallon. I remember when it was $5. Okay, this stuff is still in the $4 range if you use kerosene in them. Okay, I can burn Coleman fuel in these, which is an added benefit. But for a kerosene stove, the fuel is a lot cheaper. Okay, so that's something to keep in mind. It's also safer, and you can buy it in bulk, basically. So those are just some thoughts. In my view, everyone in America should have one of these. There's just no excuse. You know, they're so cheap. You know, to buy them new, this would be a $150 stove, and I think I paid $40 shipped for it. And it's easy to find Coleman stoves on there. You can tell this is the older style because they've got the fuel filler cap off to the side. Because when this was manufactured, people were smart enough to not open this while the stove was running, you know, similar to, you know, don't put Coleman fuel into a kerosene-only stove. It's the same kind of, like, idiocy that if this is up and running and there's, like, an 8-inch flame coming off it, that opening this and venting a bunch of, you know, pressurized air mixed in with fuel vapor is not a smart thing to do. If you notice, if you find yourself at Walmart, notice what they've done. They've taken this and they put it here. So that it's very inconvenient while this is assembled to take the filler cap off. Now you're not going to be filling it while it's assembled probably anyway, and there's really no big deal of pulling this out because it's really not, this just pulls right out here. It's not assembled. There's just these two tabs and the generator fitting into the vaporizer there. But yeah, it's an interesting sort of a design. I don't necessarily think the new ones are worse in terms of that design. I think that typically with any of these, what you'll find is the older it is, if it's in good condition, it's probably built a little bit tougher, and you know, the metal's probably a little bit heavier duty than the current ones. But being said, you know, the choice of getting a new one in excellent condition compared to an old one in ratty condition, you know, obviously get the best condition one you can. But yeah, so here's some other options basically. You know, and these are very, very high output stoves. You know, so they go a long time basically indoors. You know, if you've got kerosene put by, kerosene really sort of an ideal storage fuel because of the reasons I already said. You know, it's cheap, it's less hazardous. I'm not saying it's not hazardous. You know, if you have a house fire, you know, you shouldn't have it in your house is what I'm saying. It should be in outbuilding, a garage, something like that. You know. But as opposed to an equivalent volume of Coleman fuel or gasoline, it's definitely, you know, if you leave the top off the container, it's not going to try and get out, basically. Gasoline will evaporate like nobody's business. Kerosene will pretty much just sit there. In fact, these stoves here, with this, if this is sitting on the shelf, you have to leave this valve open. If you don't, if you leave it closed, even without pumping it, pressure will build in there and you'll come out and you'll find kerosene coating this entire thing and dripping down on the floor because it'll gradually like work its way out. But if you leave this little valve open, you know, and both these stoves have been sitting for a long time in my house without leaking. So keep that in mind if you have something like this. That if you're not using it, just leave that valve open. Don't tip it over, obviously, because fuel will leak out of there. But basically, if you treat it like a kerosene lantern, is basically the deal. And then, if you were to pack these down, you know, there's a cap that fills that hole, and then you lock this down and then it doesn't leak, basically. So, but when it's assembled, leave the air valve open, and this is an air valve on here. It does the same thing, it's just a little bit different. All right, guys. So keep an eye out. If you think you can find one in good condition, go for it. These are great options to have. You know, they're great options for sheltering in place. They're great options for moving if you're not carrying them. Okay, they're fairly reliable, and that's all for now. Thanks a lot. Real 111T signing off.